Thank you for joining us. My name is Bindu Suri. I am the host of Global News at Noon here in Calgary. Thank you so much for being with us. This is such an exciting event. I want to welcome you to Economic Outlook 2022, presented by ATB Financial, Calgary Economic Development's signature fall event. And for a second year, we will be presenting it as a live stream event. We want people to be engaged in today's live stream, so please join us for this conversation on social media by using the hashtag Economic Outlook. For the next half hour, we are hosting our pre-show. It is a chance for you to interact and network with the other attendees and watch one of our two Indigenous artists whose work will be auctioned off for charity today. You can see one of the artists here beside me getting started, very excited. The two artists with us are Keegan Starlight, he is to my right here from the Tsuut'ina Nation, and Richard Duck Chief from Blackfoot Nation Siksika. In a few minutes, Richard will join us to discuss his art and the painting that he is auctioning off today. It is titled Traditional Love. But we are very pleased to have Keegan Starlight creating his painting live here with us today. I want to introduce Keegan. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is so exciting. Talk about talent. You know you're talented when you can start and finish a painting during this event. I said, are you sure you're going to finish this? But yes, he will. He will. I can promise you that. I was asking you because, and it might be tough to see, but you had already etched out sort of your creation here to get you started, and you'll focus on the painting today. Can you tell us a little bit about your artwork today, Keegan?
So my artwork is kind of like a traditional-esque type of work. I take a lot of like traditional things that I grew up with and teachings from my parents, and then I apply it to my artwork. I try to make it a little bit more monochromatic, where I use the same colors and layer them and try to build up on the piece. But I try to use symbolism that everyone is sees every single day, right? And I mean buffaloes and animals like that, and I try to make it as familiar as I can, right? And buffaloes are just cool to look at. So
buffaloes are cool. You mentioned the symbolism. What is it about the buffalo? Because I know you've painted them before, almost like your signature piece. What is it about the buffalo that really resonates with you?
I think it's the strength part of it, and the sense of community that buffalo kind of symbolizes with the Indigenous communities, right? I mean, you have the food, the shelter, and the tools, and it's within the land, and that's kind of what I want to empower that. I want to keep on passing that message through.
This is amazing to me because I'm not an artist. There's no way I could do this. But even just sketching out the drawing here, you told me it took you about an hour to do this. When did you start? At what age did you sort of realize this is what you wanted to do? You had a talent for it. Maybe people started recognizing that you could do something like this. When did you start this?
I started out at an early age. I was maybe about like in grade 3 or 4 when I started noticing that I really liked artwork, and it was more towards like comic books and video games and things like that. And so then I didn't think it was like kind of a career choice for me until I was in high school. And then my art teacher started pushing me towards going into art college. I didn't go until I was like 25, but I started out my professional career when I was around my 20s, and I was working at an animation studio, and I just, I always gravitated towards art. It was an easier choice for me.
Easy, okay.
Yeah, I could understand it. I could understand it, right? I mean, I worked construction jobs for years, and I think that with artwork, it vocalized who I was as a person, and I love doing it. I mean, this is my passion.
It is great to meet the person behind the artwork, and to see that you found your calling is so wonderful. I'm jealous of the lucky person who gets to bid on this painting, and I know you've already started, so distraction clearly isn't an issue for you, because as I'm talking, he's already going here. You started with one color. You told me you don't know exactly which colors you're going to use, just whatever sort of comes to you, whatever you feel, hey?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe this color might be just completely covered up by another color, but I mean, this helps me to kind of ground myself for the next phase in painting.
Okay, we're going to keep checking in back with you to see how you're doing. I'm sure he's going to do fine. It's already looking amazing. So we want to also let you know, I mentioned that you can bid on the artwork. To submit a bid on either of the paintings we're going to be talking about, you can visit Keegan or Richard's, as I mentioned, their booth by clicking on Partner Connection on the left-hand menu and scrolling down to their booth profiles. You can select a profile and submit your bid in the booth chat on the right-hand side. And I'll be sure to remind people how to do that again throughout the live show. The winners of the auctions will be announced at the end of today's event. The proceeds from both of these paintings will support a great organization, the Wotan Healing Lodge and Women's Shelter. So beautiful painting for a beautiful cause. And now I'm going to introduce you to Richard Duckchief. Here is a video of him talking about his artwork that you can also bid on.
My name is Richard Duckchief. I'm from Siksika Nation, east of Calgary. Got my Bachelor of Fine Arts at Alberta College of Art and Design. My traditional name is Siksinam. My given and traditional name. And what we're going to talk about today is the representation of the war ponies that I've been working on for the past year and a half. So with this piece, we're going to talk about the idea of the war ponies and how important they were in our culture and how they were introduced into our culture. This is a piece about traditional love. And it was my idea of just to romanticize the idea of, not war ponies and like people. We all have our certain relationships with each other, and my idea is to explore those ideas in itself, like from father and son, mother and daughter, or father and daughter, and relationships, and that's what I want to explore, and that's just them at war itself, because there is that other side that's based on peace and love.
You were just hearing from Richard Duckchief. He is one of our two Indigenous artists creating these masterpieces. This one here by Keegan, he is doing this live for the whole show. He says he expects to be finished by the end of the event today, which is incredible. I'm mesmerized. I'm listening to Richard talk about his painting and the relationships that it represents, and I'm watching you paint, and it truly is mesmerizing. It's amazing. I feel like I have a shaky hand. This would not work for me. I wouldn't even be able to do the lines here. So what's sort of going through your mind, Keegan, as you're continuing to create this art?
To hurry up.
To hurry up. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's more of like a realization of like how this is supposed to turn out, right? And I mean, the more I put the brush strokes down, the more I kind of realize what's going on with it, right? And right now, I already know the colors that I'm going to use, mm-hmm. and I just need to get past this first stage, and then once I get past it, then I can continue to move on, right? So
I mean, you bring up a good point when you say hurry up, because you are under pressure. You're trying to get it done before the end of the event. How long, if there were no cameras, if we weren't here, how long do you think you would want to spend on something like this?
I think I could spend a few days on it, right?
Oh, but wow,
I mean, okay. That's more nitpicky, and then trying to make sure that I get everything that I want. But I mean, that's the fun part about doing these live paintings, is that you're kind of forced into realizing what the painting is going to be.
Absolutely. A challenge for you, the perfectionist. Mm-hmm. I completely understand. Well, this will be exciting. Of course, you can bid on this painting as well as the painting that Richard has worked on and showed us just a few moments ago. We are just about to start the actual show for the 2022 Economic Outlook, so we hope you stay with us and join us for that as well. Good morning again. I am Bindu Suri, the host of Global News at Noon in Calgary. I want to welcome you to Economic Outlook 2022, presented by ATB Financial. Now let's hear from Richard Duckchief, who is explaining some things about his painting that he created for today.
My name is Richard Duckchief. I'm from Siksika Nation, east of Calgary. Got my Bachelor of Fine Arts at Alberta College of Art and Design. My traditional name is Siksinam, my given and traditional name. And what we're going to talk about today is the representation of the war ponies that I've been working on for the past year and a half. So with this piece, we're going to talk about the idea of the war ponies and how important they were in our culture and how they were introduced into our culture. This is a piece about traditional love. And it was my idea of just to romanticize the idea of, not war ponies and like people, we all have our certain relationships with each other. And my idea is to explore those ideas in itself, like from father and son, mother and daughter, or father and daughter, and relationships. And that's what I want to explore, and that's just them at war itself, because there is that other side that's based on peace and love.
Good afternoon. My name is Bindu Suri, and I am the host of Global News at Noon in Calgary. I want to officially welcome all of you to Economic Outlook 2022, presented by ATB Financial. I say officially because for the last 30 minutes or so, many of you have had the chance to connect virtually, either privately in chat or during the group discussions that are taking place. You may also have watched our Indigenous artists. Now our actual event is getting underway right now, and we have a full agenda. We will begin with 2 land acknowledgement and blessings. The first from Dr. Linda Manyguns, PhD Associate Vice President, Indigenization and Decolonization, Mount Royal University.
My name is Linda Manyguns, and I'd like to do a land acknowledgement and a prayer. I'm Natuyik Mishishkumaki. My Indian name is Holy Spring Woman. I'm a Blackfoot. I'd like to acknowledge the Blackfoot Treaty lands in this territory that stretch all the way from Edmonton, the South Saskatchewan, all the way down to Yellowstone National Park and down the backbone of the earth into a good part of Saskatchewan. Those were our original territories. The people who lived here with us were the Tsuut'ina people. The Blackfoot people are the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piegan, the North Piegan. Our South Piegan people are in Montana. The border split us. I would like to acknowledge as well the Stoney Nakoda people who came up due to the wars in the States that were signatories of our treaty as well. And just to acknowledge that these territories hold our stories and all of our history. I'll pray now. I'll pray part in Blackfoot and in English. Ayo natos. I expamukanan, I exokapi, ikanapi, akomatapi, I natosi, I expamukanan, motokik saam, natoyi ponokapi kimpan, I expamukanan, I natosi. I honor this moment in time as the space where we come together in our thoughts and in our thinking, and hope that we find that unity so that we can always work together and share each other's stories and become one. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Linda. We now have a blessing from MNA Region 3 Elder and Knowledge Keeper, Doreen Bergman.
Tanse and Balmaita. Today, I would like to share our 4 directions prayer with you. So, depending where you're at, I'd like you to stand and face to the east as you are or where you are. God our Creator, we thank you for giving us this day to spend time together. Today we stand tall with gratitude and great pride in the spirit and footsteps of our ancestors. God our Creator, we first acknowledge the east direction, the direction of the sunrise and the new beginnings. The east is the direction of the child. So we pray for the youth of the world. Help our youth find the balance between past and present in tradition and spirit. We also pray for the First Nations, Métis and Inuit children who were found in cemeteries at residential schools. We pray that we can bring them peace. We acknowledge the white race that it represents. Now I ask you to turn to the south direction. God our Creator, we now acknowledge the south direction, the direction of summer warmth and abundance. South is the direction of the woman, and we honor them as gateways through which our spirits come to earth. We ask that women everywhere be protected, for they are sacred. We acknowledge the color yellow and the yellow race it represents. I ask you to turn to the west direction. God our Creator, we next turn to the west direction, the direction of the setting sun and the autumn season. West is the direction of the elders, and we honor our elders as the keepers of wisdom and teachers of patience. West is also the direction of our ancestors, and we proudly acknowledge those who have gone before us. We acknowledge the color red and the red race it represents. Now I ask you to turn to the north. God our Creator, we now turn to the north, the direction of the winter that covers the earth. North is the men's direction, and we honor men as the providers and protectors of the family and the nation. We acknowledge the color black and the black race it represents. God our Creator, we also pray for peace among the four races of humankind. Merci, Amen, Detwan Anan.
We thank you so much for that. We thank you for the important acknowledgement and prayers. We want Calgarians to be engaged in the discussions about our economic future. Please join this conversation today on social media by using the hashtag Economic Outlook. We are fortunate to have Francis Donald, the Chief Economist from Manulife Canada, joining us from Montreal, and Todd Hirsch, the Chief Economist with ATB Financial, in studio here for the live stream of Economic Outlook 2022. We will also hear from Doug Schweitzer, Alberta's Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation, and Calgary's new Mayor, Jyoti Gondek. They will give us a sense of their economic priorities. We will also hear from Curtis Stange, the President and CEO of our principal sponsor, ATB Financial. Brad Parry, Interim President and CEO for Calgary Economic Development, will discuss their plans for the year ahead. As part of the commitment Calgary Economic Development has made to advance truth and reconciliation, we are pleased to hear from Indigenous business leader JP Gladu, Principal at Mokwateh. Events like Economic Outlook could not happen without terrific sponsors like ATB Financial, the University of Calgary, Mount Royal University, and Post Media. Calgary Economic Development relies on the support of its more than 70 Team Calgary corporate partners to do its work on behalf of Calgarians. Let's now hear from Joe Lougheed, the Board Chair for Calgary Economic Development.
Well, hello. I'd like to start by saying that as a person that is proud of their Métis heritage and history and ancestry, it was heartwarming to hear today the land acknowledgement from our elders, and thank you very much for that. It is a small step in truth and reconciliation, and indeed economic reconciliation, and we'll hear about that more later. On behalf of everyone at Calgary Economic Development, including my fellow board chairs, Mark Blackwell from the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund, Patty McLeod from the Calgary Film Centre, and all of our board members, I want to welcome you all to Economic Outlook 2022, presented by ATV Financial. This is our signature event each fall, and it is only possible because of the support we get from sponsors like ATB. I'm looking forward to hearing from their CEO shortly in the program. Our other sponsors today are Mayoral University, Post Media, and the University of Calgary. Not only are they supporting today's event, but they are also longtime members of our Team Calgary Corporate Partnership Program. Economic development is indeed a team sport, and our Team Calgary partners play a vital role in creating a more prosperous city. The work we do at Calgary Economic Development would not be possible without the support of our Team Calgary corporate partners, along with other levels of government, and of course, the City of Calgary. We are pleased today to have Doug Schweitzer, Alberta's Minister of Jobs, Innovation and the Economy, joining us. And we are excited to hear, of course, from our new elected Mayor, Jyoti Gondek. I would like to acknowledge the hard work and tremendous service to our City of Calgary from former Mayor Naheed Nenshi and all of the members of City Council for the last 4 years of service. A shout out to Mayor Nenshi. He was a great salesman for our city over the last decade. His energy and constant enthusiasm in telling the story of Calgary to the world and attracting business to our city was so much appreciated. Thank you, Naheed. Thank you, Mr. Nenshi. We'd also, of course, like to thank the councillors who have served over the last 4 years. It was a pleasure to work with each and every one of you. We now look forward, of course, to working with Mayor Gondek and the current City Council to make Calgary an even greater city that creates opportunities for all. Brad Parry, the Interim President and CEO of Calgary Economic Development, will shortly detail our plans to build on the positive momentum in our city, the economy, and to create a prosperous economy and city for all. We have a full agenda. Let's get to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm back here with Keegan, I'm really excited to be checking in with him every so often, every few minutes, because you are just really advancing this painting. It's already using different shades. It's a different shade, but I noticed sort of the same colors here still. So you're lightening it up a bit. What do you tell us about what you're doing with the painting now?
Yeah, so I'm just adding in most of my darks so that I know where I'm going to go with the lighter colors. And then once I get my shadows in there, then I'll start going in with the whites and then start highlighting it. And then maybe a little bit of blacks, and then I'll go in with a little bit more colors and then kind of see where it goes from there.
I'm really looking at your strategy here. I'm zeroing in on what you're doing because I'm going to try this at home, clearly. Yeah. It will look nothing like this, but I'll try. I noticed you do have a photograph of a buffalo here, and you're looking at it every once in a while, but it is black and white. So what sort of inspiration are you drawing from the picture here?
Well, with my eyes, I kind of see a higher spectrum of color than most. So working with black and white photos kind of just narrows it down for me to what colors I need to put in there.
I had the pleasure of speaking to you for a few minutes before the show started, and I know you were telling me a little bit about your family and how you are all very talented. First of all, I have to say, work ethic being a very important part of your upbringing.
Yeah, my mom and dad were huge into getting us into doing work as soon as we could. I mean, I had my first kind of job when I was like 12, helping out with the different landscaping and things like that, and helping around elders' places and providing firewood for them. And then I started going on to doing like construction, but artwork was always kind of like my main focal point.
Well, thank goodness, because we get to see something like this happening live during this live stream event. And he says he expects to finish this painting by the end so it can be auctioned off. So we do want to remind you, you can bid on the paintings. So please visit Keegan's or Richard's booth by clicking on Partner Connection on the left-hand menu, scrolling down to their booth profiles, and then you can select a profile and submit your bid in the booth chat on the right-hand side. We will now hear from Curtis Stange, President and CEO of ATB Financial. Curtis.
Well, thank you, Bindu, and welcome everyone, whether you're joining us in person or virtually. I'd like to begin by congratulating Mayor Gondek and the new Calgary Council on the last week's election. You bring a wealth of experience, energy, and passion to your roles, and this is exactly what Calgary and Alberta need as we navigate through this VUCA world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I also want to thank the entire team at CED for pivoting many times to make today's event possible. If anything, this works very well with your theme of embracing disruption and change. I think we've all learned a thing or two about pivoting these past 2 years. The pandemic and the efforts to curb it have affected every aspect of our society, our healthcare system, our schools, our economy, and how we run our businesses, to name a few. Many of our clients at ATB Financial and many of you have made changes to your business models to simply keep the doors open during these dynamic times. And just when we think getting back to normal is on the horizon, there's another curveball. That begs the question, what is normal? Do we define normal as life before the pandemic? Does normal mean the status quo? In my opinion, normal is not what any of us should be striving for. The world as we knew it pre-pandemic no longer exists, at least not in quite the same way. To me, that's exciting because it leaves us wide open to grasp what's ahead of us, new opportunities. While the pandemic may have put many things on hold, like vacations and live events like this one, the Earth continued to spin and the world continued to change. Much of the change we're seeing is being driven by the rapid growth of technology, and it's changing the way we do business. We are living in a new world, one that compels industry leaders to both recognize and embrace the opportunities that technology offers. I believe positioning the province at the center of innovation will be critical to thriving in this new world. It will also mean taking a different approach to leadership, one that prioritizes people throughout the process, continues to be aware of risks, and conveys a clear and strategic vision for the path forward. And speaking of vision, the CED once again chose the perfect theme for this event. I think we can all agree that Calgary is facing the same conversations as other major cities in Canada and around the globe as we all strive to embrace disruption and change. Take energy and climate as an example. There is significant momentum right now in the markets, governments, and private businesses, including banks, to make material announcements relating to the climate transition. In my opinion, we all want our province and our country to be sustainable in the future with strong economic growth. This is about working together to create long-term value for communities, organizations, and industries. The key for me is a responsible transition, finding a path that leads to job creation and prosperity. I have every confidence we can successfully navigate this transition. We already have some of the best and brightest people in the world who we know can do great things. Just look at the progress we've seen with smart cities, smart healthcare, smart energy, smart agriculture. To get this right, it will take all of us. And as policymakers, business leaders, and investors, we must also share the values that our province was built on. Deep collaboration, adaptability, courage, compassion, and integrity. These are values that Albertans have exemplified for decades and values that have allowed us to navigate through uncertainty. Those values laid the groundwork for the sectors that Alberta's prosperity is founded on, like agriculture and energy. And they are also allowing us to pave a path forward as we develop newer and emerging sectors like technology. Together, we need to lean into these values and our leadership to create an environment where Alberta is known for solving problems, because we are not only masters at dealing with change and disruption, we are the changers and disruptors. The new world holds great promise and incredible opportunities for all of us, for all Albertans. Let's lean in, let's lead the way forward with innovation, resilience, and adaptability, and let's work together, because together everything is possible. Enjoy the event.
Thank you so much for that, Curtis. It is great to hear that sense of optimism from Curtis talking about our values and the innovation that's needed for this new economy, which is what we're talking about today. We now want to hear a few words from Alberta's Minister of Jobs, Innovation and the Economy, and the MLA for Calgary Elbow, Doug Schweitzer.
Hey everybody, Doug Schweitzer here, the Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation. It's a pleasure to be part of Economic Outlook. Really appreciate the opportunity to share the perspectives from the provincial lens. A year and a half ago when I was asked to take on responsibility for the recovery plan for Alberta, we take a look at where we were to where we are right now. There was a huge amount of uncertainty then. We weren't sure if the vaccines were going to work. We just experienced negative oil prices, huge global uncertainty. And fast forward now to where we are today. And to be honest, I haven't been this optimistic about Alberta's future in over 7 years. We take a look at the fact that our traditional economic drivers from energy, oil, gas, the pricing that we're seeing there, the turnaround in our finances from a provincial standpoint, the budget forecast going from an $18 billion deficit to around an $8 billion deficit, and it's probably even going to improve from there this year. So lots of reasons to be optimistic about the traditional economy of Alberta. I know the Calgary GDP numbers are looking positive as well. Lots of reasons to be excited. But some of the things too that have happened just in the last year alone, we've doubled the film and television industry in Alberta. We met with the big players, the HBOs, the Disneys, the Netflix, and said, what do we got to do? And at the provincial level, we fixed the film and television tax credit. And here we are now, we've got the largest TV production in Canadian history happening right now in Alberta. A lot of that activity is in the Calgary area and surrounding communities. HBO's The Last of Us. It's amazing production. Love the collaboration that we have with the City of Calgary, Calgary Economic Development on that file. In addition to that, the tech sector. Take a look at this. From 2018 to 2020, we went from 1,200 tech companies to over 3,000. The VC investment, venture capital investment, went from 100 million in 2018, over doubled that in 2019 to 220 million. Fast forward to the next year, $455 million of venture capital investment. And this year in 2021, it looks like we're going to break that record again, well north probably of over $500 million. Again, lots of investment coming in Alberta. On top of that, you've got major players coming. You've got Emphasis, you've got RBC in setting up an innovation hub. You've got Rogers and Shaw looking at putting 500 jobs for an engineering hub into the City of Calgary. So many reasons to be optimistic about the future of our amazing province. We still have lots of work to do though. We have to make sure we tackle the downtown. We've got a working group that's taking a look at the City of Calgary's proposal there. Looking forward to working with our new mayor and council on that file. But lots of reasons to be optimistic about where Alberta is going, what the opportunities are for this generation, the next generation, and the future of Alberta is looking bright. So really appreciate everyone's time. Good luck with today. I'm looking forward to hearing more about the commentary coming out of this. Talk soon.
Thank you so much, Minister Schweitzer. We will now hear from the woman who captured the country's attention last week, the first woman to be Mayor of Calgary, Her Worship, Jyoti Gondek.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to work with Calgary Economic Development over the past 4 years, and I'm very much looking forward to accomplishing many of our shared goals of building strong communities and advancing our economic success. This year's theme of embracing disruption and change is critical to this moment in time and couldn't be more fitting. Our city is facing economic uncertainty, the likes of which we have never seen in our young history. The pandemic's ongoing impacts, together with the global energy crisis and the lingering effects of pre-pandemic recession, threaten both our communities and our livelihoods. Faced with so many challenges, we must draw upon our unique strengths to chart our own path forward. The seeds of our future success lie within the wealth of experience in our energy sector, technology, innovation, small businesses, women-led enterprises, and within the arts sector. To start, we must embrace opportunity, using our ideas and our experiences to maintain Calgary's reputation as a leader in global energy production and center of excellence in a solutions-based transitioning economy. Many of our large energy companies are already setting very ambitious targets, and they're doing great work to innovate and to reduce their emissions intensity. This work must continue. Our ability to compete on a global stage depends on taking the position of being a leader in the world of transition. We have great examples of this already active in our city. Companies like Avatar Innovations have started a Center for Energy Transition, and they have started movements like carbon removal processes. Energy players globally are working with us to innovate in the carbon tech sector. Further, an economic outlook report released earlier this week clearly demonstrates that reaching a net zero future in energy can generate very large investments in technological innovation on a scale that we have never seen before. The creation of net zero asset managers initiatives that feature global banks and investment houses is a clear signal that capital will flow to places that are taking action. Calgary must be at the table. We must be there to demonstrate our leadership and our expertise as part of this change so that we can generate new jobs and new businesses to be sustainable in the long term. Doing nothing is simply not an option. On a local front, last week we celebrated Small Business Week, and we focused on the importance of entrepreneurs in our local economy. During the pandemic, our local small businesses found opportunities and they shifted gears as they needed to. We have to continue to support these small businesses as they practice innovation, inclusion, and sustainability, bringing vibrancy to our city. Alberta is also leading the charge across Canada, with 30% of tech startups founded or co-founded by women. We need to advance the labor force participation of women by ensuring that we continue to attract capital to Calgary. Women make up 51% of the population, and yet they're only receiving 2.3% of the capital that's available. Women's economic empowerment is the key to our economy taking off, and we must create and fund policies that unlock this potential. Calgary must also bolster our arts sector. The creative sector not only creates the vibrancy of city life, it adds economic benefits. According to Stats Canada data, the arts and creative sectors represent a growing industry across Canada. This sector provided 24,000 full-year jobs and contributed over $2.1 billion to the GDP in Calgary back in 2016. We need to capitalize on this opportunity to become a more resilient city. By focusing on these key sectors and advancing our city's emerging innovation and tech leaders, we can reposition Calgary as a hub for companies dedicated to pressing global issues. Calgary's local government has an important role to play in supporting our community's economic recovery. In these unpredictable times, the City of Calgary must be a source of stability for business, a focused convener of opportunities, a mindful community capacity builder. With bold leadership and a collaborative approach, we can leverage our strengths into an inclusive economic recovery that includes all of us. That's the starting point for the action that's needed to welcome and retain people and capital in our city. I look forward to working with all of you on the continued growth of our city. Thank you.
And that was, of course, Calgary's Mayor Jyoti Gondek talking about the future of Calgary's economy. She's definitely taken on a big job here in Calgary, but sounds like she is up for it. And she's also very friendly to media. We like that. We'll see how she feels a few months in. Thank you so much, Mayor Gondek. Now we will hear from the first of our economists, someone familiar to Economic Outlook audiences, Todd Hirsch, the Vice President and Chief Economist for ATB Financial. As a reminder, if you have any questions for Todd or Francis, please submit them through the chat function, which is on your right-hand side.
Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this exciting event every fall at Calgary Economic Development and the forecast for what's lying ahead next year. It's always a wonderful tradition, and I love being involved in this, so thank you for inviting me back. The title of my presentation, From Reopen to Rebuild, Alberta's Economy in 2022. I think a lot of you will agree that as we reopened the economy in 2021, even though there were some bumps and bruises along the way, it really felt good to get our economy back and reopening. But I want to make a distinction between reopening the economy and rebuilding the economy. Those are two very distinct stages. And I'm going to focus towards the end of my presentation on what we are going to need to do as a city and as a province in order to rebuild our economy. Before I get there, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about our current economic outlook for 2021 and looking into 2022. My economics team at ATB Financial, every quarter we review our assumptions and we redo a forecast so that it's current. At the moment, we are forecasting real GDP growth in Alberta this year of 6.3% and next year about 4.3%. Now, in an ordinary year, 6.3% growth would be pretty good. We haven't seen growth in the province that strong since 2012. However, as we all know, 2021, there is nothing ordinary about this year. And even though that is a pretty good sort of rebound in growth, it doesn't get us out of the hole, the contraction that Alberta sustained in 2020, an 8.2% drop in real GDP activity, the largest of any Canadian province. And even with 4% growth or so next year, we anticipate it'll take us probably until the middle of 2022 until Alberta's economy returns to the size that it was before COVID hit. And if you think about that, that is almost 2.5 years of lost growth. So it's understandable, even though we're expecting a nice rebound this year, 6%, a lot of Albertans are still feeling like we are in a recession. And it's only because our economy is actually still smaller. The energy sector, of course, our oil and gas sector, the backbone of our economy, it's doing not too bad these days, certainly helped out by high oil prices and natural gas prices. And for the most part, the energy sector is pretty stable. What we're not expecting, though, is a lot of growth out of our traditional energy sector. And I've used this metaphor before in previous years, but the energy sector in Alberta is taking on a different role. It's no longer the growth engine as it used to be. It is now a backbone of our economy. And that is a distinct change in role. Backbone, however, is very important. You want to take care of your backbone. You want to make sure it's in good shape. The growth, however, in Alberta and in Calgary is going to come from other sectors. And the mayor mentioned a few of those, the technology and digital sectors, agriculture and agri-foods, life sciences, renewable energy, clean energy technology, tourism, and of course, the film and TV industry. All of these are actually showing really nice growth right through COVID and as we move into 2022. But as I said earlier, I do want to make a distinction between reopening and rebuilding our economy. One of the interesting things going on in Alberta's and Calgary's economy right now is what's happening in the labor market. And we're seeing a paradox at the moment. We're seeing two things at the same time that economists traditionally would say, you're not going to see that at the same time. On one hand, we are seeing labor shortages. We're hearing reports from all sorts of businesses, from all sorts of industries across the province of Alberta, that they're actually having a hard time filling positions. But at the same time, we are dealing with elevated rates of unemployment. Calgary having one of the highest unemployment rates in Canada, Alberta's unemployment rate currently around 8%. Now that 8% is better than 15.5%. That's where we were in May of 2020. So it has come down, but 8% unemployment is still far too high, considering Alberta's traditionally enjoyed unemployment around 4.5%. So what is explaining this paradox, this labor shortages and high levels of unemployment? I want to very briefly suggest there are 6 factors that I think help us understand why we are seeing this paradox. The first, everyone's favorite explanation, I call it the lazy worker theory. Now everybody's got a story about this. It's usually their neighbor's kid or their nephew or some, and it's usually a young person that's kind of smeared with this, but the idea that people are just lazy. They're maybe collecting CERB or they're collecting EI and they're not willing to go back to work because they're making more money collecting their support. Now, I would admit this is happening, but I don't think it's actually as widespread as people believe it is. I think these stories just get repeated because they're a bit salacious and it's kind of fun to talk about these lazy workers. But I don't think it goes a very long way in describing or explaining why we are seeing this paradox. I think there are other factors that are more important. Another one, during COVID, I think a lot of people realized that they didn't like the job that they were in before. And during COVID, they had some time to sit and sort of reflect on life and their job and what's important to them. And I think enough of them realized that, after they were pushed off the treadmill of their work temporarily, they had some perspective and they looked at that treadmill and they said, I'm not ready to get back on that treadmill. I actually want something else in life. I want something else for my career. Now, that's very different than being a lazy worker. In fact, having some introspection and having some self-awareness about what you want in life, I think is positive. But I do think it is preventing some people from just rushing back into the job and the career they were in before. Another factor, during COVID, people had a lot of free time on their hands. I think they found there are ways, maybe unconventional ways, to earn income online. There are all sorts of websites that connect people that offer services, with people that want to buy those services. Anything from being a remote executive assistant to people who designed web pages or accounting services. Now, again, I don't know if this is a tremendous number of people, but I do think enough people have found that I can earn some income without having to go back into the job market. Number 4, and here's where we're getting into some factors that I think are more significant. Lack of affordable and available daycare. And if you need evidence of this, we just need to look back at the recent federal election. All the major political parties were unanimous on at least one thing, and that is recognizing that during COVID, the lack of daycare and a lack of affordable daycare prevented people from engaging in the workforce, particularly women. Now, as we move through COVID, we have to try to find ways to get more affordable and available daycare into the hands of parents so that they can, in fact, integrate back into the job market. Number 5, early retirement. I think during COVID, a lot of those workers that were maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 years away from retirement, I think a lot of them just decided, I'm going to accelerate my retirement plan and be done with it. And number 6, I think that there is a mismatch between some of the skills that employers are looking for and some of the skills that the applicants are coming to the job interview with. And this is, I'm going to say a bit more about skills and training in just a moment, but this is a tougher problem to solve, especially in those sectors like technology, where the skills are advancing so rapidly. It's very difficult and challenging for those applicants to keep up with every up-to-date skill. There, in fact, may be an onus on employers to say, well, maybe we can't hold out for the perfect employee. Maybe we need to find a potential employee who has some of the skills, bring them on, and then use micro-credentialing to get more of the skills into the hands of those workers. But I want to suggest these are 6 factors that I think help us understand this paradox between high levels of unemployment. Also, at the same time, we are seeing a difficulty of finding people to fill positions. But as I conclude, I want to end on a story that I think is a great metaphor for where Alberta's at right now. This story takes place in the 1500s. A Japanese shogun warrior by the name of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He did something that he regretted deeply. He dropped and broke his favorite porcelain tea bowl. Now, this was not an ordinary tea bowl. This was a very costly, very beautiful, and aesthetic tea bowl, and Yoshimasa was not prepared to part with the broken pieces. He said, I wonder if there's a way we could, in fact, repair this broken porcelain tea bowl. So the pieces were collected, they were packaged in a crate and sent overseas to where the bowl was first created. Months went by. Finally, the crate returned with the repaired tea bowl. Yoshimasa lifted the tea bowl out of the crate, but his heart sank when he looked at the repaired T-bowl because it had been bolted together with wire and staples, leaving the bowl rather ugly. All the aesthetics of the T-bowl were gone, and it was a big disappointment. Now, it was around this time, I'm going to embellish the story a little bit because we don't know precisely what happened, but it was right around this time of Yoshimasa's broken T-bowl that Japanese pottery craft people got together and they said, there's got to be a better way to repair broken pottery. And they started to experiment with epoxy glues. And they found that if they infused the glue with gold fleck and gold leaf, it actually strengthened the glue. And that, in fact, created an aesthetic quality in the repaired T-bowl. And thus was born the art of kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery. Now, kintsugi asks each one of us to accept the idea that to be repaired, you must be transformed. You can't go back to your original state. But being transformed, in fact, does not mean the damage goes away. In some ways, the damage is enhanced. It becomes part of the story of the bowl. It becomes part of the history of the bowl. And it gives the bowl this beautiful, aesthetic, almost organic property to it. Now, I think there are some really interesting connections in this metaphor with kintsugi and Alberta's economy. We have sustained some real damage, not just over COVID, but over the last 8 years. This city is not the same city it used to be. We cannot go back to 2014 or 1997 or 1979 or whatever was a great year for Alberta economically. We can only move forward. But by embracing damage, we can be transformed into something that, in fact, is stronger and more resilient. I want to quickly suggest 3 broad areas that we have to get right as a city and as a province, if, in fact, we are going to repair and transform our economy. Number 1, education, skills, and training. Now, when we think of that word education, automatically a lot of us, our minds will go to K-12, our post-secondary. Without question, we need to get those 2 things right. But I also want to suggest education and skills goes beyond K-12 and post-secondary. It starts with early childhood education, and it continues as we move through our careers. The idea of lifelong learning is not new, but in the 21st century, it becomes more critical than ever that each and every one of us are constantly updating our skills. I always tell people, if you are looking to update your skills for the job you are currently doing, you're too late. You need to be acquiring skills for what your job looks like 5 years from now. And by the way, you don't know what your job looks like 5 years from now. That metaphor attributed to Wayne Gretzky, you don't go to where the puck is, you go to where the puck is going. With respect to Mr. Gretzky, I want to suggest even that is outdated. Because if you go to where the puck is going in 2021, you're going to find that the puck is no longer a puck. It might be a basketball. And you're not holding a hockey stick, you've got a tennis racket. That is how quickly the world and industry is advancing. So acquiring skills as we move through careers, very important. Number 2, in terms of broad areas we need to get right, and that is around social inclusion and addressing economic inequality. Now, over the last few years, we have heard so much. Social movements like Black Lives Matter and George Floyd in the United States, truth and reconciliation here in Canada, and repairing our relationships with Indigenous people. The Me Too movement, all of these movements addressing racism, misogyny, homophobia, xenophobia, all the phobias. We absolutely have to get this right in Alberta. We have to address this and end all of the racism and hate and discrimination, first and foremost, because it is the right thing to do. But if that alone isn't enough for you, there is a very strong economic imperative to get this right. Overwhelming evidence suggests that if you want to be a creative business or a creative industry, you need social and cultural diversity. So social inclusion, addressing racism, misogyny, discrimination is number 2 in broad areas that we need to get right in this province. And number 3, that is Alberta's commitment to reducing carbon reductions and our goals around climate change. And I know sometimes, especially in Calgary, this can be a bit of a sensitive subject. And I understand the reasons for that. Our energy sector, our traditional oil and gas sector, there's a lot that hangs in the balance. A lot of Calgarians, a lot of Albertans are feeling threatened by this. They feel like they're being penalized, maybe unfairly penalized. They feel like, well, we can't just expect our economy to, turn on a dime. This is going to take a while. To those folks, I would remind them that the first UN-ratified study on climate change was released 24 years ago. You might have heard of it. It was called the Kyoto Accord, and it came out in 1997. We have had more than a quarter of a century to start to think about this. 2021, we need to act on it. However, I don't think we need to think about this as a penalty in Calgary and in Alberta. In fact, I think we need to view this as our greatest economic opportunity to change the narrative about what this province is about, to become a world leader. In a lot of areas, we already are a world leader in clean energy technology, renewable energy, all of the things that Avatar is doing, as the mayor mentioned. I think this represents Calgary and Alberta's greatest economic opportunity for success and to, in fact, renew our economy. So I end again with kintsugi, the idea that to be repaired, you must be transformed. We stand at a crossroads in Calgary and in Alberta. To rebuild our economy, we have to transform our economy. And I think by focusing on those three broad areas that I outlined, we will be able to build a stronger and more resilient economy for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Todd. Love the analogies, the metaphors about a transformative economy. Very interesting. Thank you, Todd, so much. For our next economist, we want to introduce Frances Donald, the Chief Global Economist at Manulife Investment Management. She joins us now from Montreal. And I want to remind you, if you do have any questions for Todd or Frances, please submit them through the chat function. We want to welcome Frances now.
Well, thank you very much. It is a great honor to be participating in this event and also to be on the virtual stage with Todd, who is the absolute authority on the Alberta economy and one of the best in Canada. And while I'm a fiercely proud Canadian, yes, located in Montreal, I do defer to his expertise on many of the Canadian and Albertan trends because my role tends to focus on the global economy. Global economy, I used to travel regularly, and yet now we are coming up on 2 years of working from home and attending conferences virtually like this one. I was reflecting on how much I've learned over those 2 years. I've, learned how to place my camera in a more flattering light. I've learned how to balance this plant on the rowing machine that I bought and I've used twice over that period. And I've learned how to become more comfortable with uncertainty, even embracing uncertainty about whether I could spend Christmas with my family or when I would be back in the office or when I could travel again. And particularly uncertainty with respect to making economic outlooks. My job today, and every day really, is to give you a forecast. And economists are often said to look into their crystal balls and predict the future. And when we don't know, we say our crystal balls are cloudy. I want to tell you right now that my crystal ball is downright broken. Now, saying that in my world doesn't tend to go over very well. You don't get on CNBC when you say you don't know, and you don't convince clients you're in good hands when you kind of shrug your shoulders. In our world, the bigger and the crazier and the louder your views, the more clicks and hits and calls that you get. But sometimes, while acknowledging uncertainty isn't the best look, it's the right thing to do. And if you're a household or a business or a city or even an economist, planning for uncertainty can be proper risk management. I will tell you, admittedly, I thought this would be a harder message to convey today, but what I've already heard from on your Albertan and Calgary leaders, even in the past hour, it seems Calgary is already miles ahead in understanding how to get comfortable with uncertainty. So in my few minutes here, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I'm going to give you an anti-forecast. I I want to talk about all the things we don't know, our known unknowns on what I'm watching in the next year, so that over the next 12 months, you can check those boxes as well and get a sense of what information are we still missing in constructing an outlook for the next year. Now, I'm not going to shirk my responsibility completely. You do have to have a base case story, and I do have a base case, and it is remarkably similar to Todd, so I don't have to spend too much time on that. In my 12-month outlook for Canada and the rest of the world, it's somewhat of a Goldilocks forecast, not too hot, not too cold. The idea is there's enough money in savings accounts, pent-up savings, desire to go to restaurants and travel, particularly domestically, for our economy to continue to recover and reopen. Very different from Todd's rebuild there. In this environment, central banks can slowly start to ease off of that extraordinarily low interest rates. They may not be as required as they were a year and a half ago. Governments can start to back away from their extraordinary levels of support. Of course, in that scenario, COVID also starts to dissipate. It becomes something of the past. Supply chains ease, and we go back to a world that, for the most part, not all parts, looks a lot like pre-COVID. So that sounds very nice. It'd be good to just stop right here. But I did tell you I was going to give you the anti-forecast for things that are making it difficult for me to have a lot of conviction in this case. And the first one, which sounds like something that it shouldn't, is COVID. COVID seems like it should be an issue that's not impacting our outlook anymore, but actually it still is. Now, COVID affects our economies in one of two ways, or both. Well, either it changes our behavior, so it affects our desire or willingness to go out into the world, or it affects how the government chooses to operate the economy. I can't tell you, I've never wanted to go back into the office more than I do right now, because somehow my small animal has come into this office. But there you go. We talked about being comfortable with uncertainty. Now, in COVID, the fourth wave, what we realized is that it was having less and less of an effect on our Canadian and US economies, but there are still major economies in the world that are shutting down when they experience COVID waves, still pursuing COVID zero. And when they do that, they provide massive global shocks on trade and activity, not the least of which China, as they continue to operate. And one of the biggest challenges we have when we construct forecasts looking out is we don't know how particularly these Southeast and Chinese economies are going to respond, the potential for rolling COVID cases over that period. We also need to answer a really challenging question, which is, was COVID a one-off that lasted for 2 years, like a natural disaster that one time hits your economy and then allows for a rebuild that makes things stronger and more productive? Or is it endemic? And if COVID is endemic, well, that's an entirely different outlook altogether. It means instead of being a one-off shock that allows a rebuild that makes us stronger, a little bit like that gold-framed porcelain, it actually erodes our ability to grow in the long term. Now, I'm no epidemiologist, but again, a known unknown, an issue that would create very different forecasts over time. And that brings us to a very closely related issue, which is supply chain disruption, something that we are all dealing with in our personal lives. Have you done your Christmas shopping yet? I have done my Christmas shopping because I am concerned for this issue. Supply chain disruptions, very challenging for Todd and I to analyze because we simply do not have the historical precedent. This is how economists work. We look at what has happened in the past and we say when X happened, it usually meant Y followed, but we just don't have that historical precedent. So we're looking at supply chain disruptions around the world and asking in surveys, are these things going to dissipate? Yes or no? And all we know is eventually they will, but we just don't have a good timeline on that. Now, if you were someone thinking out over the very long term, that wouldn't be a really big of a problem. You could pretty much bet by 2024, 2025, we're not dealing with port clogs in LA, except that as we head into 2022, we're going to be seeing a lot of government spending fall out of the equation. And what we need to see is households and businesses ramping up to fill that hole. And if supply chains are still disrupted, it doesn't matter how badly I want to get the new Harry Potter Lego. That's on the wish list. I've got to get that one for Christmas for my son. It doesn't matter how badly I want it or how much money I have in my bank account. If it's not available to me to purchase, it slows the rate of that reacceleration. So when we look at a lot of data, what we see is that it's probable that those supply chain disruptions are starting to ease and freights are being unloaded globally. And so you're going to have access to all the things and services that you want, but we just don't know. I'll add, Todd spent a lot of time talking about the labor shortage as well. That's also a key component to the story, because that, again, is a supply issue. And this time, not the supply of Lego kits or monitors or fitness equipment, but the supply of people. This is weighing on our ability to get visibility about what happens next. There's a third element to the story that I find very challenging, and today in particular, very challenging, and that is, what are interest rates going to do in this type of environment? Now, traditionally, when we see inflation start to rise, the natural response would be to expect interest rates to rise along with them. Of course, that's relevant to any of us in our personal lives who maybe have a mortgage, particularly a variable rate one, or lines of credit or anything that's tied to that, or businesses that have a cost associated with borrowing. So you might expect that with very high inflation in the system and these uncomfortably high prices, that we should be expecting interest rates to move higher. And this morning, the Bank of Canada, they were pretty clear. They do want to hike interest rates. But one of the challenges that I have when I look at this outlook is I wonder, how will Bank of Canada interest rate hikes open port closures in China? How will Bank of Canada interest rate hikes make it rain in Brazil, which is creating a very challenging drought, which is raising our costs of food? How will interest rate hikes from the Bank of Canada actually change OPEC's supply of energy and reduce some of our costs? Well, the answer is they won't. And this is the really challenging element of the 2022 outlook, is that we're asking central banks to deal with these supply chain issues that they're frankly not the right policy to deal with. That can be really challenging in this type of environment. So as we look forward to the next year, I think we have to question, do we really want to try to solve supply chain disruptions that are temporarily raising our prices with higher costs for the borrowing that we engage in and therefore dampen growth? Or do we maybe want to ride it out and look at other ways to innovate all around it? This is a known unknown that I can't answer, because as much as I have models and spreadsheets, I'm not inside the head of central bankers. And I will tell you, there's another element to the story that I'm struggling with more on a personal level. As someone who's been watching traditional economic data for over a decade, I am struggling with the entire field of economics, and whether, even though we're here to create forecasts, are we forecasting the right things? I'll explain a little bit more about that. So throughout the crisis, economists really were tied or really in a situation that was incredibly challenging. In order to get a sense of what was happening in the economy, we needed data like jobs data and spending data. But a lot of our Canadian data, in fact, most of it, is really lagged. It tells us where the economy was, a month ago, maybe 3 months ago. It didn't tell us what was happening in real time. This economy is moving so quickly, the entire profession has had to look outside the box at using different tools to measure the economy. So we started looking at data like open table restaurant reservations. If you made a restaurant reservation with open table, it's in my spreadsheet because I was trying to get a sense of what people were doing. We were looking at Google mobility data. Did you use your phone in a park and use Google? Well, we have data on that. Not to seem Big Brother. I was just trying to get a sense on what the economy was doing in that type of environment. We had to move towards a new way of thinking about how we were measuring the economy. But then this brought us to another revelation, and one that is more painful for the profession of forecasting and economics, is, should I be forecasting GDP at all? Is that really the best measurement for the health of the economy and Canadians and Albertans? I remember this one moment in March of 2020. I had a very optimistic equity market strategist who was telling us to buy stocks because even though we were experiencing the largest employment hit in modern times, it was going to hit the most vulnerable, lowest spending, and lowest wage Canadians and Americans. And therefore, GDP wasn't going to respond in the same way as past recessions. Indeed, it would bounce back much more quickly. Now, that felt wrong to me because everything I've learned about economics is that when we lose jobs, our economy weakens. But the real message was that our traditional things that we're trying to measure might be wrong. Inflation is apparently running at 4.4% if you use our traditional consumer price index to tell us what inflation is doing. But I think we all feel that costs have risen so much more than that. So what should we be measuring? Should we be looking more at not just the unemployment rate, but how many people are participating in the economy? I agree with Todd. One of the most important questions is, why are people not going back to traditional jobs? Maybe that indicator is worth more. How about hours worked? Because we've seen that particularly women with children under the age of 12, they kept their jobs, but they pulled back on the amount of hours as they were dealing with virtual learning. Affordability, inequality, entrepreneurship, all of these things make for better, more relevant forecasts to our economies of the future and are probably going to help us drive an economy that's stronger overall for everybody. So I work as a financial economist who helps run investment portfolios. That's my job. And GDP is a very good proxy for earnings over time. That's why we use it. But should we be making policy decisions and city planning decisions and investment decisions based on things like GDP and CPI? I'm just not so sure anymore. So I'll tell you that making big, bold calls about what's going to happen next is often what's considered brave in the world of economics. That sticking your head out and being very optimistic or very pessimistic, that's why you really get paid the big bucks. But I think sometimes choosing to embrace uncertainty takes even more courage. And in this particular environment, I think it's appropriate for us to have the courage to say, we just don't have crystal balls that work the same way they used to. And maybe that's okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Francis, for that. So exciting to have both of you here because you have your pulse on what's going on with our economy as we're trying to move forward, whether it's reopening, rebuilding. We've heard that from both of you already. We do have questions submitted by CED's Team Calgary partners in advance or from today's audience as well. Francis, you were just touching on this issue here. You were talking about statistics like GDP may not be as important as something like workforce participation to provide insight into where the economy is going. So has this really changed the way you are looking at statistics now? You mentioned people making reservations and that sort of thing. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? What kind of economic indicators are you now looking at to help people understand where this economy is going?
Well, it really depends on what your motivation is. As I said, if you're trying to buy stocks or sell stocks, you're looking at something different. But my hope is that we can broaden the conversation to include a wealth of data that maybe is capturing different income brackets, different backgrounds. This is something that we haven't done historically. Even Statistics Canada is changing the way that it collects data so that we have a better division so that we can look at various different backgrounds, because diversity of data is going to lead us to better policy conclusions over time. It seems like the vast amount of economic data that's traditionally covered, I mean, these are the data points where if you turn on CBC or BNN, you're going to get data points that's really capturing the upper incomes and the highest spenders in our economy. And as we think about how are we going to rebuild our economy stronger, we probably need to broaden us. So it's not that I'm saying we can't use those indicators, and I'm going to continue to forecast GDP just like Todd, because right now it's a really good stalwart, well understood concept. But we maybe need to think about a more mosaic approach to looking at data, not saying one number captures a whole story, because I think we could all agree that there's no one number that explains what's going on in our personal lives or our business. And it's time for the economics community to broaden their perspectives of that as well.
Yeah, it is such a big story, actually, with so many sides to it. And as you both mentioned, things are changing so quickly. Our economy is changing so quickly. We definitely are not in the same place we were even 3-4 years ago. Todd is here as well. Todd, just listening to Francis there talking about those economic indicators and factors, are you also looking at sort of different factors when you are also looking at that economic forecast? What are you looking at right now?
Well, I loved when Francis was talking about, not using the GDP in the same way that we used to as economists, especially when I'm talking to everyday Albertans and Calgarians and Canadians. I just don't know if talking about the GDP and what our forecasts for growth, is that helpful for individuals. I get it why, Francis uses it in investment management. We use our GDP forecast at ATB Financial to do some budgeting and some forecasting as a company. But for individuals, I think they're more concerned about where is my job going to, what's my job going to look like? Are my kids coming out of university? Are there going to be opportunities for them? Those are the things that are important for them, not the GDP being 6% or 6.2%. So I try not to use it as much or emphasize it as much in my presentations as I used to maybe 5 or 10 years ago, for sure.
I want to talk about inflation. We're talking about issues really that are in the news headlines today. Yeah. So we're talking about inflation. Of course, things are costing more. If you've been to the grocery store, you know this. Todd, I wanted to ask you, do you think we're on the verge of hyperinflation, and what might we expect from the Bank of Canada now?
Well, I have the benefit of the fact that the Bank of Canada this morning, made some pronouncements. This question of inflation, economists, traditionally we don't agree on very much, and this is a good example. There are lots of economists right now who are writing just breathless stories in national newspapers and publications about, we are on the verge of 70s style inflation, double-digit hyperinflation, stagflation with, high inflation and a stagnant economy. There are others who are saying, no, this is all a supply side issue. This all has to do with supply chains being disrupted. And once it all catches up, inflation will calm down very quickly in 2022. I have to confess, I've been more on that side of it, although I'm leaning more towards inflation becoming a more serious issue. The pronouncements from the Bank of Canada this morning, I think that indicates they are no longer looking at this as transitory inflation, that they are now expecting inflation pressures to continue to build. For reasons that, it's a supply issue, but it could also be a demand issue. There is a lot of money sitting in bank accounts of Canadians, a lot of pent-up demand. We haven't been able to do things like travel. So is that, encouraging us to go out and spend money on things like cars, and everyone, built a new deck over COVID. So those consumer demand issues, I think, are also there. I think that we do have to keep an eye on inflation. I'm not ready yet to hit the panic button and saying hyperinflation is around the corner, but I am a little bit more concerned than I was 3 months ago.
Okay, so a little more concerned. Again, lots of uncertainty there. Francis, I know you were talking a little bit about global supply chain disruptions, as we know, again, in the news headlines even today. So what do you sort of foresee with COVID-19, of course, still a major factor in business and a part of our economy as we look to adapt and transform, as you talked about, Todd. What do you sort of foresee there, a major return of, manufacturing to Canada, possibly?
Yeah, well, I'll just take a minute to say that when we think about supply chain disruptions, it is often viewed through the inflation lens, and that's one of the good ways to look at it, because it is one of the main contributors. But really, when we look at inflation, there are 3 buckets that are creating inflation over time. About 80% of it is the supply side. It's port closures, drought, labor shortages because of Brexit, tariffs, ongoing tariffs between US and China. Then you have the reopening inflation, which is all of our pent-up desire, like all I want to do is get on a plane and go have dinner with Todd, because that's what I want to do with my money, of pent-up demand to go do those things. That's going to fade as well, because, well, you can only go to dinner so many times, and once you've gone to Disneyland once, are you really going to go to 3 times? What's more challenging is the third bucket, which is the stickier kind, and that's going to come back to things like housing. And do we see people come back to the labor market, or do we need to have higher wages over that period? So what concerns me is that we tend to talk about that supply chain element as being purely an inflation side. But what worries me is that while prices are high and uncomfortable for all of us, it's also a growth story. If you've been I went to Costco the other day, and a roast I would normally get for $25 was like $75. And guess what? Just didn't buy it. That's demand destruction. That means that we're not spending as much as we would, or worse, we have to make other decisions, like filling up your gas tank is much more expensive. And for a lot of Canadians, that's not a choice, which means they got to pull back in other areas. So I think the supply chain disruption story is so complicated and extensive, and really permeates in a more deeper way than just what it does to inflation. So on the question of the manufacturing side, I think one of the areas we have to watch really closely is China. So China was first into the COVID crisis, and they were in many ways first out, although they are still pursuing the COVID zero type of policy right now. But they actually engaged in a lot of tightening, the type of tightening that the Bank of Canada is talking about. China did all of last year, and that's going to slow manufacturing and allow for a deceleration over the next 6 months or so. So we shouldn't get used to the really high demand for goods that we've experienced. What we hope will happen is a little bit of what we call the K-shaped inversion. So in the past year and a half, we saw services doing really badly. That's the bottom half of the K, and manufacturing activity doing really well. I think we're going to see the inversion of that, which is services activity come back really strong and manufacturing slows back to levels that are a little bit more consistent with the pre-COVID trend. So I know I rambled there, but your question has so many tentacles into the way we have to think about the 2022 outlook. But I would be really focused here on what the global developments are doing to the Canada story. And as I said, I'm a proud Canadian, but so much of what's happening to the economy this year is really being driven by global factors.
Well, let's talk about what's happening here in Alberta with oil prices. Oil prices are rising again. And hearing you, Todd, talk about things like moving forward, transform, we've heard words like innovate, change. So when we hear about oil prices rising again, I know a lot of people are thinking sort of back in time when we talked about the Alberta advantage all the time. But like you say, things are changing. So with oil prices rising, is this a good thing for Alberta?
Well, I think it's a good news, bad news story, more in the good news. I mean, this is our primary commodity that we produce and export. It's fantastic news for the provincial government and all of us as taxpayers that, you know, we see money collected from royalties from oil and gas helping our provincial government, you know, pay for some of those things we like, healthcare and education, roads. So it's good news on that front. Where I sometimes think it's, you know, maybe not always good news. For one thing, it is a consumer issue as well, where we all face sticker shock at the pumps when we're fueling up. And that, as Francis said, does constrain some of our other spending. You know, we're spending so much money filling up our automobiles that it leaves less for other things that are maybe more enjoyable or more fun. But the other issue for Alberta is, you know, every time those oil prices climb higher, there's a downside to that roller coaster. And this is the world we live in the province, this up and down being beholden to oil prices. I think today we are less beholden than we were in the 70s or previous eras. But still, for every dollar it ticks higher, that is going to be a dollar on the downside when global supply and demand issues sort themselves out and oil prices then correct. So it's good news and bad news, mostly good news, but there are some kind of dark sides to it too.
Okay, we have to leave it there, but I have so many other questions. I want to talk about childcare.
All I heard is that Francis is coming out and buying you dinner.
Yeah, for dinner.
I am.
I'm waiting for my invitation, but we'll see where that goes. But such an evolving conversation. So thank you both, Francis and Todd, for being here and chatting with us just a little bit. We're just really skimming the surface here. Todd and Francis joining us today for this discussion about our economic outlook. Well, we will now hear from Brad Parry, Interim President and CEO of Calgary Economic Development. He will be joining us in just a couple of moments here to talk again about this incredible event here, the 2022 Economic Outlook. We've heard from community leaders, business leaders, and we are now about to hear from Brad Parry. He will be joining us here on stage. Brad.
Thank you, Bindu. Thank you for spending time with us today. And wow, what an interesting discussion. You know, I'd like to take just a quick moment and thank some of our key corporate sponsors again. I know you've heard it before, but you know, without supporters like ATB, University of Calgary, Shaw, Aspen Properties, TELUS, Brookfield, Nutrien, Bow Valley College, Rogers, Mount Royal University, and so many more that I can't even get through today. I just want to say thank you so much. Your contributions, your support, your belief in the work that we do means so much to us, and without your help, we couldn't do what we do. I'd also like to take a quick second to thank our board of directors, the Calgary Economic Development Board, the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund Board, as well as the Calgary Film Center Board. These are volunteer boards who work tirelessly in our mission to make Calgary that destination of choice for people. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also thank the incredible teams at Calgary Economic Development, OSIF, the Film Center, whose passion, drive, and commitment to our city is second to none. And lastly, I really would like to congratulate our new mayor, Mayor Gondek, and all of the council for this new era that we have coming. We look forward to working with every one of you to continue to help position Calgary for long-term economic success. You know, it has been a challenging time as we've navigated and continue to navigate through this pandemic. But it was a little bit hardening, a little bit of optimism, some silver linings came out of what we heard a little bit there. But you know, one thing you're going to hear about, you've heard today, and part of the theme is change. And it's a word you're going to hear me say quite a bit throughout the next few minutes. But I want to build a little bit on what we just heard from Curtis earlier, from Mayor Gondek, from Francis and Todd, and give you a sense of what we at Calgary Economic Development are doing to help build on that little bit of optimism and momentum that we see coming through. You know, our focus at Calgary Economic Development is really simple. It's about retention, expansion, and attraction of companies, capital, and talent. You know, we work to ensure that there's opportunity for shared prosperity throughout our communities and that all Calgarians can participate fully in the economic future. You heard Todd talk about the inclusion requirement of that. We need to do that. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic and the evolving economy has really exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in many areas of our society. You heard Curtis talk about this, but you know, we've seen the attention that's been drawn to disparities in the workforce, ESG, and again, inclusion. But one of the opportunities is that inclusion. And we want to make sure we understand that the Indigenous economy and economic reconciliation is one of those opportunities for that inclusion. And you're going to hear shortly from our friend JP Gladu, who's going to talk to you about that economic reconciliation. But the opportunities are here. We have opportunities to build communities that are more resilient, more equitable, more diverse, more inclusive, and more focused on the future prosperity. But what hasn't changed is the vision for the city, which was built for the community, by the community. We are a city for people who embrace technology and who want to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. This is a city that is changing with the world, but also helping change the world. And you know what? Our local companies are embracing digital technologies. They're transforming, they're becoming more productive, more competitive, and more sustainable. It's great to talk about momentum and optimism, but momentum, building that momentum is another thing. You know, over the last year, we've seen a little bit of that momentum. We've seen the signs that are coming. You know, we know that there's a $20 billion opportunity coming at us for digital transformation in Alberta for the next 3 years. We heard today that Calgary's economy is expected to outpace the economic growth of Canada's economic growth for the next year. We heard that our GDP will be back to the same levels, if not higher, than the pre-pandemic. And certain forecasts that came out this week talk about potentially a 6% increase in GDP in 2022. We're seeing record levels of venture capital investment. You know, we've seen over $600 million in the last 20 months come into our community. $600 million, which has eclipsed anything we've done in the past. And that's not going to stop. But as Todd noted and as Curtis noted, you know, for us to get this right, we have to do a few things. We really need to do a few things right. One, we need to make sure that we are creating opportunities for all. Two, we have to look to lead on the energy transition. We have to continue to support the amazing work that Tom Muller and the team at the city is doing on building a vision for a vibrant downtown community. These are keys to economic growth. Don't kid, these are necessities for us. But there's two other areas that we really, really need to focus on, and we focus on at Calgary Economic Development. And you heard a bit about this before. One is really making sure that we build out our talent stream. And two is the diversity of our economy. You know, as I mentioned before, you know, our mandate is really to help position Calgary for long-term economic success through the expansion, retention, and attraction of companies, capital, and talent. But part of our work is also about trying to dispel some of the myths and help change some of the perceptions that are out there about our city. We know perception leads to reality. You know, and as we talk about diversity of our economy, perceptions are incredibly important. And in fact, we just finished our annual perceptions study that we do outside of our market. And the data we'll have for everybody in a couple of weeks. But one stat that jumped out at me, one thing that really caught our eye was that in 2016, we surveyed business leaders across North America. We asked them about Calgary's diversity of economy. Only 46% agreed that Calgary could have a diverse economy. 46%. We fast forward 5 years. Over 76% of those same business leaders now believe Calgary has and will continue to have a more diverse economy. That's 5 years. That's amazing to see this progression, especially given the situation we've been in over the last 18 to 24 months. You know, we're seeing this, and this is more than just a stat. We're seeing this in the people and the companies who are choosing to be here. They're making the choice to build here. They're making the choice to grow here. They're making the choice to thrive in our city. And frankly, we don't need to look far for those examples. I mean, look at the momentum that's happening with some of our local companies. We have the Semens, we have the Benevides, two amazing success stories who frankly could have built anywhere. They could have gone anywhere in the world, but they chose to be here because they could. We have Neo Financial, supported through an investment in the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund through Harvest Builders, who are going parabolic with their business and their job growth, who are centered here. Again, they chose to be here because they can be. We have Alta ML, another OSIF investment, working to help retrain the workforce of tomorrow today. Again, centered here. Nationally, we're seeing companies and people placing bets on our city. You heard earlier this year, RBC announced that they will be putting one of their innovation centers here in Calgary, creating 300 jobs. The Rogers and Shaw merger, again, another national company building deep roots in our community. CP Rail and Kansas City Southern will do the exact same thing, but on a continental basis. And just as importantly, we're starting to make inroads internationally. We've seen major global companies and players start to come into our community. The Infosys, the Emphasis, the Unity, which is the largest 3D game engine builder in the world, has set up shop and building roots here. You know, we can't forget about Hollywood. You heard Minister Schweitzer speak earlier. There's $500 million of investment being done in the creative industries here in Alberta, in Calgary, this year alone. But what's really telling is that these companies, whether local, national, international, they're here not just to build their business, but they're here to help build our community. But we have to understand, for us to help build our community, we have to invest in making sure we support local companies to be even more competitive. You know, at Calgary Economic Development and at the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund, we understood this. And we saw this, we heard, we listened. And that's why we purposefully chose to pursue investments in local, national, and international accelerators that will help our local companies become not just global players, but globally competitive, but at a far more accelerated and advanced rate. And that's key, that advancement and acceleration for us to continue to build those global companies that are competing on that stage. You know, a big part of what we do at Calgary Economic Development is really supporting local companies. And I mentioned the expansion and growth earlier. You know, we don't have to look too far. Again, if we look at our Trade Accelerator program, which has worked with over 200 companies in the last 3 years, helping them take their products and services and build a plan and help them go to other markets in North America and globally. They've signed 90 deals in that time span. And I can tell you, Shona and the team do an amazing job, and we are the envy of other communities who come to us to look for how do we replicate this program. But we can't sit still. We've heard that before, and I'll say it again. The momentum in our economy this year is something that we have to build on. Our long-term prosperity will come down to our ability to retain, train, and attract talent. We need to give our young people reasons to believe versus excuses to leave. We have to prove to them that they don't have to go to Toronto. They don't have to go to Vancouver. They don't need to go to Boston or New York to build a global career. They can do it right here. If we look at the announcement earlier this year from the University of Calgary with the Quantum Center for Computing, the hub for quantum computing, that sends a message. That sends a message that their opportunities are here and they will be endless. We just heard Francis talk about labor force participation as a key economic indicator. It's like, okay, so why is that important? Well, I can tell you that Calgary has and continues to have one of the highest labor force participation rates in the entire country. And why is that important? It's because people want to get back to work. They want to make sure that they're contributing back to our community. And that's why helping them and our community build the skill sets that will make them invaluable in the digital economy is absolutely so critical. You know, we've invested in the State Digital Talent Hub. We've invested in building micro-credentialing programs that Todd talked about, such as NPower. And we also have a program that we stood up called Edge Up, which was designed to help retrain displaced oil and gas professionals into in-demand jobs that our community needs to continue to thrive and grow. And again, this is another program that's a model for other cities that they're trying to follow. I talked about perceptions a bit earlier, and while we're doing some great things, we're seeing some good progress, we have a lot of work to do. And I mean we, I don't mean Calgary Economic Development. I mean we as a community. Because if we want this city to be a place where our children want to stay, thrive, and grow, it'll be up to us. We need to tell our young people and people around the world that this is the place where you can build your best life and make a difference. You know, it takes time to change perceptions. It really does. It's not easy. But if we commit to making the investments in telling the stories, the investments in celebrating the wins, the investments in believing in ourselves, the results will come. You know, our job at Calgary Economic Development, as I mentioned, is really the expansion, attraction, but it's also making sure that our community is ready for what's coming next at us. I don't mean next week, I don't mean next month. I mean 3, 5, 7, 10 years down the road. We need to know what are the global forces that will shape our economic future and ensure that we are positioned for long-term economic success. Standing still is not an option. Calgary is a city poised to grow and evolve. Our future is up to us. By working together, we'll be more diverse. By working together, we'll be more innovative. By working together, we'll be more creative. By working together, we'll be more inclusive, and we will be more resilient. We have to be the change makers. And now, I'd like you to hear from some local change makers today.
There's a reason why I'm in Calgary. I think it's like an excitement almost, like an entrepreneurial spirit.
We've made a blood test to detect breast cancer.
We're destigmatizing mental health.
We actually won an Xbox exclusive partnership.
Purposefully creating change for women and women in business.
We're actually the original family that brought Vietnamese food to Calgary.
Really?
Yeah. We've been developing new tech for 15 years, and people walk in here and are surprised that this is happening here.
We're out to do great things in the world. We're connecting people with causes that they care about.
The small business community has been really welcoming.
I've been in tech in Calgary for 25 years now. It's so night and day different.
If you're not cool and you don't care about the world, then I don't work for you.
We say yes to ideas. We all rally behind people who have those ideas.
The more you build here, the more people want to move here.
Once people visit, they really don't want to go back where they came from.
You can fly, fish, golf, and ski sometimes within a week.
There you go. Met a lot of talented Calgarians who gave me tools and tips and tricks.
There's this feeling that we actually care for one another.
People work really hard here, but are also really friendly.
We're seeing a growth in VR, we're seeing a growth in technology.
Look, you can do what you want here. The sky's the limit.
We are building an ecosystem. We are building a future.
Businesses that are looking at Calgary as a hub, I mean, we've kind of got it all.
It's a great place to live and grow.
In Calgary, you are 1 or 2 conversations away from the biggest investment you'll get.
This community, this province is wide open.
They're interested in you as an entrepreneur, and they want to see you succeed here.
Very inspiring hearing about the game changers here in our community, just showcasing some of the talent that Calgary Economic Development is really investing in. Speaking of talent, look at this painting. Wow, you just transformed this canvas of a sketch really of this buffalo and the vibrant colors you're using. Tell us sort of how have you progressed to this point in this painting and sort of what you were thinking. Is this what you envisioned at the beginning?
No, not really. I mean, like I said, I mean, the colors just kind of show themselves, right? I mean, I knew the buffalo was going to be the focal point, and I mean, that it doesn't really say much if it's just a sketch on a painting, right? But I mean, with the colors that's added to it, right, it almost gives it a living, breathing substance.
You've really brought it to life. It is beautiful. Wow, we are going to keep checking in with you. This looks incredible. Thank you so much, Keegan. Keegan, one of 2 Indigenous artists. We are auctioning off their artwork, and so we'd like to check in with Richard Duckchief. He is the other Indigenous artist who has been working on his art piece as well, and he's going to talk about a little bit about it. It is also up for auction today.
I also try to keep the idea in a Blackfoot symbolism idea of itself, so that people would identify and say, okay, this is Blackfoot, as you can see right here. This is a symbol of Siksika. These are markings in the back here and the buttocks of a horse that's they're like horse hooves. And these horse hooves represent what I've been told is when they've gone into battle, they've captured more horses than they would during battle, so they would mark them on their own ponies. And the circles around the eyes are to enhance their vision during battles and to see better at night and during the day. That's what it is. It's a symbol that empowers your vision. The markings on the nose are the battles they've won during battle with other tribes. There's 3, as you can see, they've been in 3 battles. And the hands is a representation of giving them their power and giving them their blessing and, you know, this and ownership. And, you know, this is my horse and this is what they've been through. So like I said, I just like to see them as people themselves. That's the idea, the spirit of the horses, of the people, the spirit of the people themselves. There's that reflection. And that's what I wanted to do. And during a lot of the Plains natives do decorate their horses. Some of them have feathers. The majority of them have feathers. They put feathers into the horses' manes, and this is just a form of decoration. And as you can see, this I made a flower because, you know, this is a traditional love and idea of romance, and that's what I want to capture with a lot of these works I've been doing on the war ponies. What I do also is I take my markings around the horse itself. It's like a glow, and it's like a blessing. It's like their spirit is with them. That's why you would see the lines around him. All the horses I would do, you know, this is like their spiritual selves, their spiritual beings. So that's why I wanted to capture on that. I've done that with many my other horse paintings. So yeah, these are one of many paintings I've done, and this is the one that will be part of the show.
Really love the colors in both of these paintings. They're beautiful, and the meaning behind them as well, the significance, absolutely amazing. So very excited to have both of these artists here with us. As a reminder, we are approaching the final call for bids on the paintings. You can visit Keegan's or Richard's booth by clicking on Partner Connection on the left-hand menu, scrolling down to their booth profiles. All proceeds raised will go to support the Wotan Healing Lodge and women's shelters. So some very deserving charities there. Calgary Economic Development is committed to a journey of truth and reconciliation with Indigenous people in Canada. This year, the decision was made to give the last word of economic outlook to JP Gladu, a principal at Mokwateh. JP will give us his perspective on economic reconciliation in Canada and how it can foster economic growth and opportunity. JP will be donating the proceeds of his appearance today to the Wotan Healing Lodge and Women's Shelter.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to Luke for inviting me to give the closing remarks today after the economic outlook for 2022. I am calling in being recorded today from my home territory. I grew up here in Thunder Bay. In the background, you'll see the Sleeping Giant, Nanabuju. I actually worked out there as a young man at the Provincial Park cutting ski trails and all the bush trails. And Fort William First Nation is just a few kilometers from here as the crow flies. I grew up in Thunder Bay. I did a lot of hunting and fishing, and actually this last weekend I was actually fishing and hunting with my daughter. I always knew that I was going to be in the natural resource sector. I was very fortunate to have a father that was a logger. His father was a logger. My mom's father worked for the Trans-Canada Pipelines. And what I was so grateful for was the fact that both of my parents had a parent that had a job, which created modeling for me. And I knew I wanted to be a conservation officer when I was younger. And I went to school in Sault Ste. Marie. I was very fortunate because I had the tenacity to go and the confidence to go because my parents were able to put food on the plate and able to put me in things like sports and hockey. And that's what our youth need. They need that modeling. They need that opportunity to see what's possible. So when we think about the economic outlook, when it comes to the intersection of Indigenous peoples, we need to be thinking about those things. We need to be thinking about the jobs. We need to be thinking about the entrepreneurs that are growing in numbers and scale and scope and sophistication and complexity. Those entrepreneurs are hiring their own people. Those people have children. Those children are going to grow up to be the future leaders of this country. And the partnerships that you're going to build, the people in the room today, or at least calling in from your computer screens, and the impact that you have to help create those partnerships with our communities is fundamentally important. When I think about the challenges, of course, we're in unprecedented times with multiple waves of COVID, but we're also in a time where Canada has woken up to the reality of Indigenous peoples and the unmarked graves, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission coming to the foreground. Looking at the United Nations Declaration, the rights of Indigenous peoples here in Canada. How are we going to incorporate that into our everyday lives of business and policy? And it's a pathway forward. But there's all these opportunities to do things differently than the way that we've done them in the past, where our people have stood in the peripheral and on the sides of society, looking for opportunities, but not really afforded them. I've been so grateful and quite frankly, lucky in many regards to be able to participate in the economy in a leadership role. My last role as the president and CEO of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, I had a front row seat to the entrepreneurs. I had a front row seat to the policymakers and the business leaders and the folks like Mark Little, who have made tremendous strides but aren't resting on those laurels, resting on what they've accomplished in the past, but always striving for more. And so what does that outlook look like for our communities in this country? I sometimes refer to being born in the wrong province occasionally. As many of you know, I spent a lot of time in Alberta. A lot of my friends are there. A lot of the work that I'm so lucky to be able to do exists in Alberta. I actually hunt as much as I possibly can in Alberta. And from that point, I look at the economic activity of Alberta. And it's been tremendous, where our First Nations are and our Métis communities are owners in pipelines, owners in East Tank projects, working with the provincial government on an energy corridor. You've got the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, run by my dear friend Alicia Dubois, who is helping capitalize Indigenous projects and communities to empower them with an economic engine that will bring the communities to economic parity. These are the types of activities, these are the types of things that are in the realm of possibility. They are, because we're doing them now. We need to dig deeper though. When we think about Canada, and we think about our natural resources, one matter is that we're heavily endowed with them, but we can be doing better with our Indigenous communities. We need to create deeper capital pools. We need to be going to communities at the very beginning of a project, not at the end when a project's been done, and asking them for what they think and if they would approve a project. We need to be bringing them in at the regulatory process right at the front end, empowering those communities to be equitable partners, making sure that those knowledge holders are brought to the forefront as we develop and think about the way we're going to execute on our project and the way that we're going to reclaim any land that we disturb, and making sure that our people are the ones reclaiming those territories and those lands for the continued economic, social, environmental prosperity of our communities. When I think about economic reconciliation, it really is about managing wealth. And managing wealth, well, you've got to generate it first before you can manage it. And so we need the expertise, we need the business opportunities. I want to commend my successor, Tabitha Bull, for bringing to the finish line the idea of a procurement target. I was so lucky back in the day when Mark stood at the front of the room for our procurement champions, because we know that supply change when it comes to the opportunities and the relationships to build now and into the future between our Indigenous communities and our corporations, and to see that come to the forefront. So for companies and organizations that are looking for new pathways forward, get in touch with Tabitha and her team at the CCAB. They've got a great program, the Progressive Aboriginal Relations Program. They've got the procurement program. I also, look to my colleagues like Clint Davis and Jeffrey Sear, who run and have run capital pools, and looking for ways to propagate those capital pools and find ways to draw upon them, to bring to the table so that our communities can be equitable partners, as I've mentioned. For folks that I'm so grateful to call friends and colleagues, many of you know how passionate I am about governance. It's been about a year now since I've joined the Suncor board. I've been on the Noront board for over almost 5 years. I was on the Ontario Power Generation board. I was the chair of the Mikisew group of companies and their board, and again, front row seat to the economic engines that are driving prosperity for our communities and our country. I want to say a congratulations to Sherry Brandt and Roberta Jameson for joining the TD and Royal Bank boards, and Sean Willey for joining the TELUS board. And for corporations that are wondering what I'm talking about, if you're looking internally at your own board of directors, do you see anybody that looks like me? Well, hopefully not like me much, but in the sense that we've got Indigenous people at your director tables and helping guide the strategy with your companies. That's really important. These are the simple things I think that can be worked on in a very short term, which is going to help advance the relationships in this country. And there's also this opportunity to address climate change together. Absolutely, we have a challenge in front of us. It's been with us for a while now. As I mentioned, incorporating Indigenous knowledge holders into decision-making processes and the way that we develop projects is really important. I'm also lucky to be heading up a group of Indigenous leaders with the Energy Futures Lab. It's part of the Natural Step, talking about what the future fit, say that 5 times fast, future fit of hydrocarbons in this country, and the role of Indigenous people in the way that we continue to develop our resources in a sustainable fashion. Also looking at the natural processes, and one of the best carbon-eating machines that I know is a tree. Are we doing enough in our natural environment? I'm very lucky also to be chairing a group of the Boreal Leadership Champions, which is looking at sustainable, responsible development, as well as the opportunity to balance that with Indigenous protected areas and making sure that Indigenous people are a part of that process. I recently moved back home to my community of Sandpoint First Nation. It was a challenging time for sure, to say the least. After leaving the CCAB and the OPG board and packing up my condo, I was on my way to Fort McMurray to work with Dave and Nicole and as the new CEO of the Boucher Group. Unfortunately, that opportunity didn't come to full fruition due to the price of oil and COVID hitting. But the Creator put me on a new path. And that path has been quite an adventure for me. And I'm so incredibly lucky to be waking up on my reserve most mornings and working with communities and corporations from across the country. As I mentioned this last weekend, my daughter and I were hunting together. And the day went like this. We got on our side-by-side, visited the river to take a look that goes onto Lake Nipigon, which is the biggest lake in Ontario, surrounded by the Ontario borders. The whole lake is protected. Our way of life is protected. We're able to go fishing and hunting and enjoy the natural beauty and know that our environment is clean. We drive down the reserve road, and at the end of that road where it meets Highway 11, we have a sawmill, which I was, again, so grateful to have the opportunity to work with my own First Nation to get that sawmill established over 10 years ago and to see it running strong today and to be producing lumber for our own community in the region and to work with local forest companies. On the way there, we passed an old rail bed. And then we go across the road and we go into our territory, and there's the lithium mine, a road that goes to an exploration area where there's lithium exploration happening and some real amazing opportunities. We pass the Trans-Canada pipeline, again, where my grandfather's footsteps were in helping build that line. Then we can go up to the dam where one of our community members operates a partnership with Axor on a 10 megawatt two run-of-the-river projects. And all this is in my backyard. The ability to drive an economy, the ability to share my land practices with my daughter, to pass that knowledge on, to have a clean, healthy environment, along with all those activities, electrical generation, gas line, forestry, mining. We can find that balance, and people can work together and have Indigenous people as partners. This is what I hope for the rest of the country. If I can just share one last little story with you, one that I really enjoy sharing because I think we're at that point. If you've read Jim Prentice's book, Triple Crown, you'll know that Jim, the late Jim Prentice, did a great job in understanding, at least trying to understand the Indigenous people. That was one of the crowns when he talks about when he wrote Triple Crown. When I was about 18 years old studying forestry, our tech had us on a road and we were grading trees. And I remember the tree, it was a yellow birch. And ones, he said, were lots of lumber, great value tree. Twos would be lumber and pulpwood, and three was mostly pulpwood. And he asked us all, well, what we thought that tree was. 1, 2, 3, and all of us started yelling out ones, and some of us were yelling out twos. And he said, you were all wrong. He said, not one of you got up to get her up and walk around that tree to see what was on the other side. There could be a big crack, it could be a tree, you don't know. And like Jim Prentice, he got up and he walked around the Indigenous tree. If you don't understand us, how are you going to work with us? So thank you all for attending this important event today and understanding that Indigenous people are part of the solution. We're friends, we're business partners, we're community members. And we look forward to building this economy with you. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, JP, for those very important remarks. And thank you to all of our speakers today. We can now say who the winners are of the two paintings that we are auctioning off during this event. The winner of the Keegan Starlight painting, which is this one beside me here, is Cliff Bort. Congratulations to you, Cliff. And the winner of the Richard Duck Chiefs painting, Traditional Love, is Samantha Jovanovic. Congratulations to you, Samantha. And of course, all of the proceeds will support the Awotan Healing Lodge and Women's Shelters, so some very deserving charities there. Thank you to everyone for joining us today for an engaging and informative Economic Outlook 2022, and we look forward to the year ahead. Thank you for attending.
There's a reason why I'm in Calgary. I think it's like an excitement almost, like an entrepreneurial spirit.
We've made a blood test to detect breast cancer.
We're destigmatizing mental health.
We actually won an Xbox exclusive partnership.
Purposefully creating change for women and women in business.
We're actually the original family that brought Vietnamese food to Calgary.
Really?
Yeah. We've been developing new tech for 15 years, and people walk in here and are surprised that this is happening here.
We're out to do great things in the world. We're connecting people with causes that they care about.
The small business community has been really welcoming.
I've been in tech in Calgary for 25 years now. It's so night and day different.
If you're not cool and you don't care about the world, then I don't work for you.
We say yes to ideas. We all rally behind people who have those ideas.
The more you build here, the more people want to move here.
Once people visit, they really don't want to go back where they came from.
You can fly, fish, golf, and ski sometimes within a week.
There you go. Met a lot of talented Calgarians who gave me tools and tips and tricks.
There's this feeling that we actually care for one another.
People work really hard here, but are also really friendly.
We're seeing a growth in VR, we're seeing a growth in technology.
Look, you can do what you want here. The sky's the limit.
We are building an ecosystem. We are building a future.
Businesses that are looking at Calgary as a hub, I mean, we've kind of got it all.
It's a great place to live and grow.
In Calgary, you are 1 or 2 conversations away from the biggest investment you'll get.
This community, this province is wide open.
They're interested in you as an entrepreneur, and they want to see you succeed here.